Christmas. My Christmas. Today, Christmas is the biggest festival in the world. It has become so massive that the amount of money spent on Christmas in just 1 year is more than what Muslims collectively spend on Eid over 10 years. But the real question is, why is Christmas celebrated at all? The largest religion in the world today, Christianity, believes that on this very day, Arserworth December, Jesus, Isa peace be upon him, was born. But then another question arises. If this truly is the birthday of Isa as, why don't Muslims celebrate it? The answer lies in a deep historical confusion that began nearly 2,000 years ago. Around Arling years ago, Isa as was born through a miracle in a small town of Palestine. At that time, Jews lived in Palestine, but they were not the rulers. The land was under the control of the greatest superpower of that era, the Roman Empire. This was the time when the Roman Empire was at the peak of its power, ruled by Caesar Augustus, one of the strongest emperors in Roman history. His name is still remembered today, so much so that even a month of the year, August, carries his legacy. When Augustus reached the height of power, he made the same mistake that many rulers before and after him have made. Instead of seeing himself as a human being, he began to consider himself a god. Across the Roman Empire, temples were built in his name, and people were forced to worship him. History shows that whenever someone reaches such a level of arrogance, Allah sends a mighty prophet to break that pride, just as he sent Musa as against Pharaoh. It was during this very era that Isa as was born. He grew up in Palestine under Roman rule, among the Jewish people. From childhood, Isa as was different from other children. Once, while walking in the marketplace with his mother Miriam as, he suddenly disappeared. His mother searched everywhere in panic, until she reached a Jewish temple. There, she saw young Isa as standing among senior Jewish scholars, debating with them. The scholars' faces were filled with anger, because no one had ever dared to question them the way this child was doing. As Isa as grew older, Allah granted him a unique power. With the touch of a finger, he could heal the sick. He used this gift to help the poor and the suffering. Slowly, people began coming to him from faraway places. His fame spread across Palestine, and wherever he went, crowds followed. People welcomed him outside their cities, and Isa as healed them one by one. Everything seemed fine, until Isa as began addressing people directly. Sitting with his followers, he started delivering speeches, repeatedly exposing the corruption of the Jewish scholars. He told people that their religion had been destroyed by these scholars, who sat in temples collecting donations from the poor and altering divine verses for money. Again and again, Isa as called them hypocrites. The common people were deeply inspired by his words, but the scholars saw their power and income slipping away. Hatred for Isa as filled their hearts, and they began plotting to kill him. But under Roman rule, such a move was impossible, at least for now. As Isa as grew even more popular, things changed rapidly. Wherever he went, thousands gathered just to see him. One day, when he headed toward Jerusalem, the capital of Palestine, people rushed out of the city to welcome him, laying palm branches in his path, a sign of the highest honor at the time. Roman generals were stunned. Who was this man receiving a king's welcome? The Roman authorities grew fearful of his influence, while the Jewish scholars already despised him. Together, they conspired against Isa as. Soon after, Isa as shared a final meal with his closest 11 or 12 followers. According to Islamic belief, Allah then raised him to the heavens. Christians, however, believe he was killed. Isa as was gone from the world, but his followers remained. They decided to spread his teachings everywhere. They first approached the Jews but were rejected, so they turned to the rest of the world. Christianity began spreading rapidly, and among the new followers was a man named Paul, Saint Paul. Paul played the most significant role in shaping modern Christianity. Before him, people believed Isa was a prophet and servant of Allah. Paul introduced a new concept, that Isa was not just a man, but the Son of God, and God himself. Ironically, Paul never met Isa in his life. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, a problem arose. Roman religion revolved around the worship of Jupiter. To attract Romans, early Christians made changes. Isa's name was changed to a Roman-friendly name, Jesus. Paintings were created portraying him as a white European, even though Isa was from Palestine. These images later became some of the most famous and expensive paintings in history. Despite persecution, Roman emperors tried to stop it by killing Christians, committing brutal acts described even in the Quran, like the story of the people of the cave Ashab-i-Kahf, who slept for 70 years to escape oppression. 300 years later, Christianity became so powerful that Emperor Constantine himself converted. With the emperor's conversion, everything changed. Now, followers of the old Roman religion were persecuted. To unite the empire, Roman leaders blended pagan traditions with Christianity. This is where the concept of Christmas was born. Romans already celebrated a major festival in December for Saturn, using pine trees as sacred symbols. These traditions were merged with Christianity, and December was declared the birthday of Jesus. The entire empire converted, but Islam rejects this date. The Quran describes Isa's birth occurring in a season when fresh dates were available, meaning summer, not winter. Even Christians admit they do not know the exact date of his birth. Over time, Christmas evolved from a simple church gathering into a massive commercial festival. Music, alcohol, and eventually Santa Claus were added. Santa was inspired by St. Nicholas, but his modern red and white image came from Coca-Cola advertisements. Today, Christmas is celebrated worldwide, even in non-Christian countries, generating over $1 trillion annually, more than 10 times what Eid generates in 10 years. But it wasn't always like this. And the story doesn't truly end here. As Christianity spread beyond Rome, it didn't travel alone. It moved alongside empires, first the Roman, then the Byzantine, later the Spanish and British empires. Wherever armies went, church lands were conquered, cultures were reshaped, and slowly Christianity planted itself across Europe, Africa, and parts of Asia. With power came influence, and with influence came control over narratives, what people believed, what they celebrated, and what they questioned. Over centuries, Christmas stopped being just a remembrance of Isa. It became a symbol. Kings used it to show unity. Churches used it to strengthen authority. Merchants saw opportunity. What was once a quiet religious gathering turned into a season of lights, gifts, feasts, and spending. The spiritual meaning faded into the background while tradition took center stage. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, Isa was never forgotten, but he was remembered differently. Muslims honored him as one of the greatest prophets, born miraculously, speaking in the cradle, calling people back to worship one God. His story was preserved without alteration, without paintings, without festivals attached to dates unknown. Respect existed, but worship was reserved for Allah alone. As centuries passed, generations grew up believing what their societies celebrated. For many, Christmas became less about belief and more about emotion. Childhood memories, family gatherings, gifts under a tree. Few stopped to ask where these traditions came from, or how much of them were religious, political, or purely commercial. And then came the modern age. Corporations entered the story. Advertising reshaped Christmas into a global event. Movies, music, shopping seasons, discounts, decorations, all synchronized around one date. Even people with no belief in Christianity began celebrating Christmas, not as faith, but as culture. A festival once rooted in theology became a worldwide business machine. At the same time, questions quietly remained unanswered. Why does the Bible not mention a date? Why do the Gospels differ? Why do historical records stay silent? And why does the Quran describe a completely different season for Isa's birth? Yet, most people never ask. Because traditions, once normalized, stop feeling strange. So when Muslims do not celebrate Christmas, it is not out of hatred, disrespect, or denial of Isa as. It is because Islam teaches something deeper. That truth does not change with popularity, that prophets are honored by following their message, not by inventing festivals around them. And perhaps the real story of Christmas is not about a date, or a tree, or even a festival, but about how history, power, belief, and commerce slowly intertwine, shaping what the world remembers and what it chooses to forget. Think about it. History is not written only by prophets or by common people. History is shaped by those who hold power. When power changes hands, truth often gets repackaged. Not always erased, but rewritten in a way that suits the ruler of the time. And Christmas is one of the clearest examples of this process. When the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, it did not truly abandon its old beliefs overnight. People who had worshipped the sun, Saturn, and Jupiter for generations could not suddenly let go. So instead of forcing them to forget everything, the empire chose a smarter path. Blend the old with the new. Familiar festivals, familiar symbols, familiar dates, just given new names. This way, people felt they were moving forward, while still holding on to the past. That is why the sun's rebirth became the sun's birth. That is why evergreen trees, symbols of life during winter, stood tall in living rooms. That is why feasts, candles, and lights survived under a new religious label. Slowly, over generations, no one remembered where these practices came from. They only remembered that this is how it has always been. And when something feels ancient, people stop questioning it. At the same time, the image of Isa as transformed. The prophet who walked barefoot among the poor, who challenged corrupt scholars, who called people back to sincerity, was now painted as a distant divine figure, untouchable, unrelatable, surrounded by gold, crowns, and thrones. His message of humility slowly gave way to rituals, ceremonies, and institutions. Islam, however, froze the narrative in time, not by stopping progress, but by protecting meaning. Isa as remained a human being, a servant of Allah, honored but never elevated beyond his true position. No birthdays, no statues, no altered stories, just the message. And here lies the core difference. Islam asks you to remember prophets through obedience, not celebration, through values, not festivals, through truth, not tradition. But the world doesn't move on truth alone, it moves on emotion. A child opening gifts feels joy. A family gathered around a table feels warmth. A city glowing with lights feels alive. And so Christmas became emotionally untouchable. Anyone who questions it feels like they are attacking happiness itself. Yet questioning is exactly what Isa as did. He questioned scholars, he challenged systems, he stood against comfort built on falsehood. If Isa as were to walk the world today, would he recognize the festival built in his name? Or would he once again stand in a crowd, quietly asking the questions no one wants to hear, because maybe the real loss is not about one date being wrong. Banned. Maybe the real loss is that the message got buried under decorations. And as the world continues celebrating louder every year, spending more, consuming more, remembering less. Christmas did not become what it is today in a single moment. It was shaped slowly by empires seeking unity, by scholars seeking influence, by merchants seeking profit, and by generations who inherited traditions without ever being told their full story. What began as a simple remembrance turned into a global phenomenon, louder than truth, brighter than history. And for Muslims, the matter was never about rejecting Isa. In fact, no Muslim can be a Muslim without believing in him. But belief in Islam is not built on dates, festivals, or emotions. It is built on clarity. Isa is honored, respected, and loved. But worship belongs only to Allah. His story is remembered, his miracles are believed, and his message is preserved without adding or subtracting anything. And this is why Muslims do not celebrate Christmas. Not because Isa is forgotten, but because he is remembered exactly as he was. A prophet sent to guide people back to one God, a voice that challenged corruption, a life that was never meant to be commercialized, painted, or turned into a $1 trillion season. So the next time the world lights up in December, perhaps the question is not, why don't Muslims celebrate Christmas? Perhaps the real question is, what would Isa himself think of it all? And maybe, just maybe, the truth was never meant to be celebrated once a year.